The courtroom was dead silent as Judge Greg Mathis leaned forward, his signature serious face slicing through the scorching television lights. The classic burgundy and gold setup of his nationally syndicated program shone under the studio lights, projecting an aura of power and intimidation that had worked for him for more than 20 years. In front of him, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was sitting absolutely poised, her burgundy jacket crisp against the witness stand, her dark hair drawn back in a business-like coiffure that spoke volumes of a woman who meant business. What nobody in that packed Los Angeles courtroom expected, though, was what happened next. The audience of nearly 200 people, hardcore fans who'd driven in from across the country to see their favorite TV judge do his thing, leaned forward in expectation. They tuned in hoping for the same familiar formula. Judge Mathis would ask tough questions, maybe lecture a bit about personal responsibility, and the guest would either break down under pressure or give stock political answers. But what happened next would change the future of political television forever. Judge Mathis, his voice thundering with the weight of decades of presiding over courtrooms throughout America, initiated the showdown. You speak for justice, yet your record in Congress suggests otherwise. Do you come to explain yourself, or are you another politician cowering behind a wall of rhetoric? The air was thick with anticipation. The room fell dead silent. The audience collectively gasped, some squirming in their seats. This was not intended to be an interrogation. It was supposed to be a polite conversation regarding criminal justice reform on his nationally televised program. Mathis had other intentions, though. He believed he could trap the emerging Democratic star from Texas, reveal her as another Washington insider who could not withstand actual scrutiny outside the congressional protective bubble. What he did not anticipate was for Crockett to smile. Not a politician's nervous smile, but a self-assured, knowing smile of a person who had entered this trap voluntarily. "Judge Mathis," she began, her voice even, slicing through the tension like a knife. "Before you go questioning my record, perhaps we should discuss yours, since I have some receipts I brought with me today that might shock all of us in this room." The camera tightened in. Mathis's arrogant grin started to fade, and for the first time, his face was crossed by an expression of worry. His production team bustled around behind him. Producers spoke urgently into their headsets as camera personnel adjusted their shots, sensing intuitively that this was not going according to plan. Before we get into Jasmine Crockett utterly destroying Judge Mathis on his own program, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. And be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. This political battle is just beginning, and you won't want to miss what comes next. The anticipation of this confrontation had been months in the making. Judge Mathis had been increasingly vocal in his criticism of what he called Twitter politicians, young legislators who seemed more concerned with going viral than with accomplishing serious legislative work. He had been calling out politicians such as Crockett by name for weeks, making pointed remarks about individuals who thought hashtags were the same as legislative victories. And here's where it gets juicy. Although Mathis never mentioned her by name, political commentators and fans of both Mathis and Crockett couldn't help but notice that the description sounded an awful lot like Crockett. The subliminal messaging was clear to anyone who was listening. Mathis, a man who built his fortune being the voice of authority, was positioning himself to school this young politician in a thing or two. On her own behalf, Crockett knew of Mathis's statements, but had not publicly responded. Her people had wanted her to engage his criticisms, but Crockett chose a different approach. She prepared herself quietly in expectation of what she had anticipated would be a showdown in the end. And here's why this is about to get explosive. Crockett's history as a criminal defense lawyer and civil rights attorney meant that she understood the strength of reflecting an opponent's attack right back at them. She was not about to fold under pressure. She was going to fight back, and she had the proof to do so. To understand just how explosive this confrontation was, let's take a moment to learn more about the two people at the center of this drama. Judge Greg Mathis built his empire on being the tough, no-nonsense voice of justice that America desperately needed. Born and raised in Detroit's projects, Mathis rose from humble beginnings to become a district court judge and later a television star. His show, Judge Mathis, has been on the air for over 2 decades, making him one of the most recognizable faces in television justice. At 64, Mathis is an old-school veteran who has been around the block. He's made his name by cutting through political correctness and dishing out tough love that makes people squirm, but ultimately makes them better. And this is where the rubber hits the road. Mathis made a name for himself as a voice of accountability, accepting no excuses from anyone. But his disillusionment with the current political landscape, and more specifically with performative politics, began to get the better of him. Mathis was critical of what he saw as the proliferation of politicians more interested in social media stardom than in policy change. That is when Jasmine Crockett stepped in. A 42-year-old force of nature from Texas, Crockett had been shaking things up in Washington since she got there. A former criminal defense lawyer and civil rights attorney, Crockett didn't hail from political royalty or family money. She had worked her way to Capitol Hill through grassroots organizing and tireless work on behalf of criminal justice reform. Her 16-hour days prior to seeking office weren't spent schmoozing and making connections. They were spent doing the work and serving the people. Crockett did not arrive in Congress as a newcomer. She rocked the boat. Instead of just following the unwritten rules quietly, she jumped right in, going after Republicans and status quo Democrats alike with her penetrating questioning during committee hearings. Her viral altercations, grilling witnesses over corporate malfeasance, and delivering passionate speeches on police reform made her a social media sensation. But these also earned her enemies among those who preferred the old way of doing things. And this made her the perfect target for Mathis. But here's the thing. While Mathis was gearing up for a fight of experience, Crockett was gearing up for a fight of principles. She wasn't just there to defend herself. She was there to defend an entire new generation of leaders who refused to play by the old rules. This was more than a political debate. It was a showdown between the old guard and the new wave, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. And this is where Mathis's plan backfired. What he hadn't anticipated was that Crockett wasn't playing the same game as him. She was playing a different game. She knew the law, knew the media, and most importantly, knew how to turn the tables in her favor. The venue itself contributed to the drama. This was not a talk show where confrontation could be anticipated. This was Judge Mathis' courtroom, his territory, where he had ruled for years. The audience, filled with his longtime fans, had come to see him do his thing. But as the cameras rolled, Crockett was poised to turn it all on its head. Mathis had spent the last week gearing up for this. He had studied Crockett's legislative record, discovered what he thought were vulnerabilities, and was prepared to use his TV background to reveal her as a flashy politician without substance. But Crockett was not here to make excuses. She was here to set the record straight. And what Mathis did not know was that she had been training for this moment her whole career. As the cameras whirred and the studio lights burned bright above, Mathis launched his opening salvo. Congresswoman, let's discuss actual results. You've been in Congress for nearly 2 years now. You've proposed legislation, given speeches, gone viral on Twitter. But what have you actually achieved? What legislation have you passed that has altered anyone's life? The air in the room grew heavier. This was Mathis's trademark maneuver, cut right to what he perceived was the nub of the issue. His voice was courteous but insistent, the identical voice he employed when he scolded defendants who made excuses. Those in attendance murmured, some in concurrence. Classic Mathis. But Crockett didn't flinch. Her response was swift and deadly. Judge Mathis, I appreciate the question and I'm happy to discuss my legislative record. But first, let me ask you something. When was the last time you were in an actual courtroom handling real cases instead of television drama? And that, my friends, was just the beginning. What transpires next will render you mute. Mathis, the self-proclaimed tough guy, was in for a political and legal adversary who had done her research, and the cameras were recording every moment of it. Hold on to your seat for the continuation of this volatile showdown. You won't believe what Crockett has waiting for Judge Mathis. Judge Mathis, Crockett started, her voice firm and assertive. Since you're so eager to discuss that bill in particular, allow me to tell you something intriguing. She paused, allowing the gravity of what she was about to say to suspend in the air for a few seconds. The crowd was already on the edge of their seats, anticipating something enormous. Then she landed the bombshell. 3 weeks ago, your production company was awarded a $2.3 million contract from the same private prison corporation that's been lobbying against criminal justice reform. The room fell absolutely quiet. There were gasps from the audience, and the camera operators instinctively zoomed in on Mathis's face, which had transformed from confident to shocked within seconds. It was obvious that Crockett wasn't only playing the game, she was going to alter the rules. Crockett's tone rose a level, but she was fully in control. My bill might be stuck in committee, but at least I'm not taking cash from the people who profit from mass incarceration while pretending to care about justice on television. You could sense the change in the room. Mathis's calm exterior cracked. He sprang up from his seat, now standing stiffly, his voice escalating in indignation. How dare you enter my courtroom and bring accusations of that nature? You have no idea what you are talking about. But Crockett wasn't intimidated. She didn't flinch. She simply dipped into her briefcase for a thick file, a movement that was almost casual, but with an inevitable suggestion of intent. This was calculated courtroom drama at its finest. She was completely in control of the script. The file was thick, heavy with research that represented hours of preparation far beyond what most politicians would do for a simple television appearance. This was no longer an interview. It was a struggle for control. Really, Judge, I know precisely what I'm discussing, Crockett went on, her tone measured. Unlike some individuals, I do my research prior to leveling accusations. The onlookers, who had been somewhat uncertain about what was happening, were now riveted. Phones began to emerge from pockets as people realized they were witnessing something momentous. Social media alerts were already chiming in as the initial footage of the opening exchanges began spreading online. This had turned from a standard interview into an all-out political showdown, and everybody could sense it. The air in the room was so tense you could have cut it with a knife. The camera operators instinctively inched closer to the action, sensing that they were on the verge of recording something that would be etched in political history. Producers were scrambling in the control room to decide if they should cut to a commercial break, but they soon realized that they couldn't. The ratings were going through the roof. This was television gold, and they were only just beginning. The contract is a matter of public record, Crockett stated, opening the folder with the slow deliberation of a person who had performed this dance countless times previously in actual courtrooms. Signed just 3 weeks ago, the same week you began your media tour criticizing criminal justice reform advocates. Interesting timing, don't you think? Mathis's face turned a bright red. The normally calm, controlled individual was quickly disappearing. For the first time in 20 years of television, the man who made a career of keeping others on their toes appeared truly shaken. His hands clenched the arms of his chair as he struggled to regain command of the situation. My business dealings are none of your concern regarding my views on justice, Mathis protested, speaking more loudly than usual. I've been fighting for criminal justice reform since before you were born. But Crockett was on a roll now. Have you, though? She said, her voice cutting as she closed in for the kill. Because I also brought something else that might interest everyone here. The room fell silent. You could hear the cameras buzzing, but all else ceased as Judge Mathis realized he was no longer in control. Crockett had reversed the power dynamics in the room entirely, and Mathis could feel it. He had thought he was in control, but Crockett was systematically dismantling his case, layer by layer. What we're about to see, Crockett stated with a smug smile, is going to change everybody's understanding of who's really working for justice and who's acting like one on television. This was the moment that would change everything. What happened next would become the most watched clip in Judge Mathis show history. Shared millions of times across social media platforms, dissected by political commentators, legal experts, and ordinary viewers who were witnessing the unraveling of a political titan. Crockett rose from the witness stand, her movements graceful and assured. All eyes in the room were upon her. Her heels clicked on the polished floor, echoing with every step as she approached the judge's bench. The cameras reflexively shifted, sensing history being made in this instant. Even the seasoned camera operators who had taped thousands of hours of courtroom drama knew that this wasn't an everyday exchange between a judge and a visitor. This was a carefully orchestrated takedown by someone who had done her homework, and it was going to pay off in front of an audience of millions. Judge Mathis, Crockett started, her voice now taking control of the room. You questioned me about my legislative record. That's okay. But before I respond to that, I believe everyone present is entitled to hear about your new business deals and why you're actually asking these questions. The way she said the word really sent shivers down the spine of the audience. The tension was thick, and you could sense the change in the room. This was no longer a political debate. This was a full-blown legal takedown of someone who believed they were above the law. She opened the folder and drew out a document, holding it up for the cameras. This is a contract between your production company, Mathis Entertainment, and Correct Solutions, one of the biggest private prison operators in the nation. $2.3 million over 3 years for something they refer to as media consulting and content development. The response was instantaneous. The crowd gasped in unison, some of them reaching for their phones to take video. Mathis's face went from shock to panic. He had been ambushed, and now the world would witness it. That's a business deal, Mathis stammered, trying to regain control of the narrative. It has nothing to do with my show or my views on justice. Crockett smiled, a smile that spoke of satisfaction, not cruelty, but the subdued self-confidence of someone who had just proved she was playing a whole different game. Really? She said, extracting another document. Because this email from Correct's Vice President of Government Relations to your producer indicates otherwise. Shall I read it aloud? Mathis began to protest, but Crockett was already reading out loud. Thank you for agreeing to assist in moving the dialogue on criminal justice reform. The recent effort by progressive lawmakers, such as Crockett, is jeopardizing our business model. Having Judge Mathis question their efficacy would be extremely useful to our legislative efforts. The courtroom erupted into pandemonium. The spectators couldn't believe what they were witnessing. Some yelled out questions, others just stood in shock. Mathis, the man who had ruled the courtroom for decades, was now being revealed for what seemed like a huge conflict of interest. But Crockett wasn't through. Judge, you questioned my effectiveness as a legislator. You want to know what I've been doing? Let me show you what I've been doing while you've been busy taking money from private prisons. She reached into her briefcase once more and pulled out a thick stack of papers. This is the Second Chance Act amendment, she continued, which I've been co-sponsoring with senators from both parties. It's designed to reduce recidivism by 40% over 5 years by expanding education and job training programs in federal prisons. The audience leaned forward in anticipation. She held up another document. This is the Police Accountability and Transparency Act, which would condition federal funds for police departments on transparency and accountability measures. And this, she said, reaching for another document, is the Bail Reform Act, which would eliminate cash bail for non-violent offenses nationwide. Judge Mathis tried to interject, but Crockett skillfully spoke over him. Those are just bills, you say. Anyone can introduce bills. You're right. Anyone can introduce bills, but not anyone can get them out of committee, past lobbying efforts from corporations like Correct, and signed into law. The Second Chance Act cleared the House 3 weeks ago on a bipartisan vote. The Police Accountability Act is currently being expedited in the Senate. And here's the punchline. Crockett raised her hand for silence as the crowd erupted into applause. But here's what really matters, Judge Mathis, she said, her voice growing stronger. Well, you've been sitting in this television courtroom for 20 years, talking about justice, but taking money from people who profit from injustice. I've been in real courtrooms defending real people. I've gotten wrongfully convicted people out of prison. I've sued police departments for misconduct. I fought private prison companies in court and won. Now Mathis was on the defensive. He had spent years being the one who put people under the spotlight and made them respond to tough questions. Now the tables were turned, and it was clear he wasn't prepared for that. "You came at me today thinking you could embarrass a young woman who doesn't know her place," Crockett continued, her voice now righteous in anger. "But what you didn't realize is that I've been training for bullies like you my whole career. And here's the kicker. The aftermath of this exchange was completely bananas. MSNBC's Rachel Maddow dedicated an entire segment to breaking down Crockett's performance, calling it a masterclass in how to handle hostile interviews and turn the tables on bad faith questioners. The New York Times published a lengthy investigation, The Business of Television Justice, which examined how reality television judges like Mathis had built media empires while having financial relationships with the industries they opined on a daily basis. And the drama did not stop there. The Washington Post fact-checkers spent weeks verifying every document Crockett had referenced. Their ruling? The integrity of Crockett's research was beyond question, and they praised her thoroughness in preparing herself for this moment. It was not a political battle, it was a fact-based strategic victory. Even international media picked up the story. The BBC broadcast a report on how the standoff mirrored broader dynamics of American political discourse. European news outlets were especially fascinated by what they saw as an American quirk, the intersection of entertainment, politics, and justice playing itself out on live television. And then there was Fox News. Tucker Carlson, notorious for his assaults on Democratic politicians, conceded on his show, "I disagree with just about everything Jasmine Crockett believes politically. But what she did to Judge Mathis today was something. She was prepared. She remained calm under fire, and she destroyed him with facts. That's not partisan politics. That's just good strategy." Republicans could learn a page from her book. Even Sean Hannity, who rarely sees eye to eye with progressive Democrats, appreciated Crockett's skill. "Look, I think her policies are wrong for America, but you have to admire the way she handled herself in that fight. She did her research. She presented evidence, and she held her own when someone tried to bully her." That is what we want to see from our elected officials, even when we don't agree with them. This was not just a political fight, it was a revolution in how political power is wielded on television. Crockett had turned the tables completely, and the entire world was now watching. The impact on Judge Mathis was immediate and devastating. Within the next morning, hashtag Mathis prison money was trending alongside hashtag Crockett exposes Mathis. Investigative reporters, who had initially minimized the private prison connection as a minor business deal, began to dig deeper. What they uncovered made the story even worse for Mathis. Over the past 5 years, companies owned by Mathis had received over $8 million in contracts from prison companies, bail bond companies, and others who sold services to law enforcement. Mathis's hometown newspaper, the Detroit Free Press, ran a front-page expose titled "Television Judge's Business Empire Built on Mass Incarceration." The article detailed how Mathis had built a network of businesses under the radar that profited from the same system he claimed to lament on his TV show. For Mathis, the personal toll was enormous. He appeared on a number of shows trying to do damage control, but each appearance made matters worse. On The View, he tried to argue that his business partnerships didn't influence his opinions, but when Whoopi Goldberg asked him directly why he had never disclosed these partnerships, he had no good answer. "Judge, you've built a career on holding other people responsible for their actions," Goldberg said, her voice level but piercing. "How can you not see that people have a right to know about these financial connections when you're making decisions about criminal justice?" And the fallout did not stop there. Within a week, 3 major advertisers canceled their sponsorship of Judge Mathis, citing objections to undisclosed conflicts of interest. The show's ratings, which had been declining slowly for years, plummeted by 30% in the weeks following the Crockett confrontation. For Jasmine Crockett, the backlash was the opposite. Her congressional office reported receiving over 50,000 calls and emails in the days following the show, 90% of them positive. Donations to her campaign fund surged, despite the fact that she wasn't up for re-election for another 2 years. More importantly, her heightened visibility translated into real political clout. The Second Chance Act amendment that had been stalled in Senate committee for months acquired 3 new Republican co-sponsors out of the blue. The Police Accountability Act was expedited for a floor vote. Even conservative senators who disagreed with her ideology admitted they had developed a new respect for her political skills. What Congresswoman Crockett demonstrated, Texas Senator John Cornyn, a Republican who didn't frequently praise Democrats, said to the Post, is that she's not a Twitter politician. She does her homework. She knows her facts and can hold her own under fire. I may disagree with her policies, but I admire her preparation. This was where Crockett's political capital took off. What began as a change in a television courtroom had turned into a career-altering incident that made her one of the most talked-about figures in American politics. Yet the lasting reverberations of this face-off were enormous. It was no longer about these 2 men. It extended far, far beyond. This incident became a textbook case study in political communication. It was taught in law school and journalism school as a model of how preparation and authenticity could overcome experience and home field advantage. The Kennedy School of Government at Harvard included the whole video in their coursework, using it to teach future government officials about crisis communications and the importance of thorough preparation. 2-party political consultants parsed every second of the exchange with the intensity of coaches analyzing game tape. What Crockett did, James Carville exclaimed on his podcast, was turn Mathis' strength against him. He tried to use his experience and authority to bully her, but she flipped it and made his experience look like complacency and his authority look like corruption. It was political jiu-jitsu at its finest. And the story did not end with Crockett and Mathis. It opened up a broader conversation about conflicts of interest in media, one that extended far beyond television judges. Several other television personalities and political pundits were forced to disclose their own business interests after journalists began investigating whether the Mathis case was an isolated incident. Major news outlets instituted new disclosure policies, and the Society of Professional Journalists updated their ethics guidelines to explicitly address financial relationships with industries that personalities comment on. To young politicians, especially women of color who are entering a system that was not designed for them, Crockett's performance was a blueprint for how to handle hostile interviews and older competitors who underestimated them. She showed that you don't have to be respectful to someone just because they're older, more famous, or have bigger platforms. Sometimes, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted in a post that gained 500,000 likes within a few hours. The most respectful thing you can do is tell the truth, even when it makes people uncomfortable, especially when it makes people uncomfortable. The incident also highlighted the generational divide in U.S. politics and media. Older leaders like Mathis, who had built their careers on respect and authority, were being challenged in ways they never expected by younger leaders who had grown up with social media, instant fact-checking, and a culture demanding transparency. And here's where you come in. If you enjoyed watching Jasmine Crockett completely annihilate Judge Mathis with facts and preparation, be sure to give this a like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of our upcoming political takedowns. Who do you think should be the next victim of this kind of accountability? Let us know your ideas in the comment section.